In this lecture, I will be talking about John Perry's article entitled Frege on Demonstratives. The general idea of this lecture is to look at this one way of defending and elaborating the direct reference theory of meaning, which we saw initiated by Kripke's work last week. In this video, I'll provide you an overview of the content of this lecture and then introduce the notions of context sensitivity, which are important background for the arguments of this paper. So here is an overview. In his paper, Perry provides an objection to Frege's unified account of sense. The objection is on the basis of context-sensitive language. Perry also takes some preliminary steps in accounting for cognitive value on direct reference theory. Now, in the rest of this video, I will explain to you some of the basic ideas behind context sensitivity in language. So, the basic idea behind context sensitivity is that there are certain linguistic expressions which are context sensitive. Now, what does that mean? A context sensitive expression is one whose meaning changes from use to use. So this is in contrast with proper names and definite descriptions, which are many of the examples we've used so far. Okay, so specifically we're going to be focusing on context-sensitive referential expressions. So intuitively, a context-sensitive referential expression is one whose meaning or referent changes from use to use. Okay, so the proper name Aristotle, for instance, intuitively, the proper name Aristotle, when I say it or you say it or anyone else says it, it has the same meaning between all these different uses. Similarly, if I use a definite description, the student of Plato, all the different uses of that definite description pick up the same person. So proper names and definite descriptions do not seem to be context sensitive. However, there are many referential expressions which are context sensitive. In this section, I am going to be mainly presenting some seminal ideas for understanding context sensitivity from the seminal work of Kaplan, David Kaplan, on his paper, which is entitled Demonstratives. Now, I have assigned that as a supplementary reading. I did not, however, provide access to it in the library course reserves. If you're interested in reading the paper, which you should read if you want to find out more about context sensitivity, then you should try to find it yourself or ask me during office hours. In any case, in this video, I'm going to be presenting some of the basic ideas for understanding context-sensitive referential expressions from Kaplan's work. So the first thing is the distinction between two kinds of context-sensitive referential expressions. The first kind is indexicals. So an indexical is a context-sensitive referential expression whose value is simply and directly determined by its context of use. So the paradigm examples of these expressions are as follows. The word I, the word you, the word here, the word now, and the word today. So fixing on the word I, the idea is that different uses of that same word I have different meanings. So when I say the word I, so for instance, if I say I am hungry, the word I, as I use it there, has a different meaning than if you say the sentence I am hungry. When I say I am talking about myself, whereas when you say I, you are talking about yourself. So again, different uses of the same word I by different people have different meanings, okay? And these meanings vary between contexts, and this is in contrast with non-context sensitive referential expressions like proper names. Another example is here. So when I use the word here, I'm talking about the place where I am. Whereas if you use the word here, you are talking about the place where you are. So different uses of that word simply and directly pick out different locations. Okay, now the other kind of context-sensitive referential expression Kaplan calls demonstrative. So a demonstrative is a context-sensitive referential expression whose value is not simply or directly determined by its context of use. It requires further supplementation from the context. So for instance, to go back to the example of I, when I say I, it simply is obviously talking about me, the speaker. And when you say the word I, it's obviously talking about you, who is the speaker. However, when I use the word this or that, it's not obvious what exactly I'm talking about. So for instance, imagine we're sitting in a park and watching a bunch of dogs play. And if I say, that dog is beautiful, if you just hear me say that, it won't be clear to you exactly what dog I'm talking about. Typically, you have to kind of consider where I'm looking or where I'm pointing, or if there's a dog that's especially salient. For instance, one has just run up to us. Okay, so the words this and that, which are the paradigm examples of demonstratives, those are context sensitive in the sense that different uses of the word that can be used to talk about different things. However, the way in which the word this or that is able to pick out something in the context is not in the same simple way as the word I does, because the word I simply picks out the speaker. Whereas the word this or that, you have to consider what the speaker is pointing at, or what the speaker is looking at, or some other aspects of the context. So there's this further supplementation to understand how it is that demonstratives are supplied with a value in context. Okay? So in order to truly understand what's happening with the meaning of context-sensitive expressions, we have to get on the table a classic philosophical distinction between type and token. So this is a general distinction which will apply to these words that we're thinking about to be able to describe what's happening in a clearer way. So we want to distinguish between word types and word tokens. A word type is a general sort of word, whereas a word token is an instance of a word type used on a particular occasion. So, for instance, the English language contains the word type I. So if you look in the dictionary, one of the words you'll find is the word I. Okay, so this general type of word I is a sort of word that English contains. However, when a particular speakers use that word on different occasions, they are uttering tokens of that word. Okay? So, again, there's a type of word which is the sort of thing which the word type I is, And then there's a particular utterances or uses of I, which are different things. The different uses of I are different tokens of the general word type I. Okay, so we'll see in a moment why this distinction is important for being able to talk about the meaning of these expressions. But first, here's an exercise to illustrate in general this distinction between type and token. The exercise is as follows. I want you to consider the sentence in 1, which is as follows. Rose is a rose, is a rose, is a rose. This is a sentence, the first line of a poem. In any case, what matters is the following question. How many words appear in this sentence? Now, when you reflect on this, you will realize that this is kind of a trick question, because when we ask how many words appear, what we're asking is ambiguous between whether we're asking about word types or word tokens. So suppose I ask you again, how many words appear in this sentence 1? Now, one answer is 3. The reason why one answer is 3 is that there's only 3 types of words that appear. So there's a type of word rose, there's a type of word for is, and there's a type of word a. So there's only 3 types of words whose instances or tokens appear in this sentence. So one legitimate answer to this question is 3. Only 3 words appear in this sentence. However, another correct answer to this question is not 3, but rather 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So again, to summarize, another answer to this question, how many words appear, is 10. Because there's 10 particular token words that appear in the sentence. So for instance, the word type rose has 4 tokens in this sentence. Okay. Similarly, the word type is has 3 tokens. Okay. So understanding these 2 different possible answers to this question illustrates the distinction between word types and word tokens. To repeat, a word type is a general class or kind of word, and those word types can be used on particular occasions, and what are used are tokens, are different tokens of that same word type. Okay. How can this distinction between type and token help us with context sensitivity? The reason it can help us is because we want to distinguish between the different kinds of meaning that this word has. Okay, so as I said at the very beginning of this section, that different uses of these context-sensitive words have different meanings. So what does that mean? What that means in terms of our type-token distinction is that different tokens of a context-sensitive word type, sorry, let me repeat that with better intonation. Different tokens of a context-sensitive word type differ in their meaning. Okay, so there's the one word type I, and different tokens of that word type differ in their meaning. So again, when you have different tokens of a context-sensitive word type, you have different meanings. But we can also plausibly say that the word types themselves have a constant meaning. So, for instance, we can say that the word I is associated with the following general rule. An utterance of the word type I refers to the speaker in the context in which it's tokened. So to repeat, the word type I can have the following constant meaning. An utterance of I, or a tokening of I, refers to the speaker in the context in which it's tokened. So this general rule I've just given you is a general kind of meaning that can attach to a context-sensitive word type. So for example, if you were to look in the dictionary at the entry for the word I, you would probably find something like that. Okay, now furthermore, what we can say is that a token indexical, so a particular use of the word I, for instance, it gets its meaning, its particular meaning on that occasion, by applying the role or the rule, of the type to the context of its production. Okay, so I just gave you a general rule that the word type I has. And now when a particular word I is used, when a particular token of I is used, the meaning that it has can be determined by applying the general rule of its word type to the actual context in which that token is happening. So this is a kind of a picture of how context-sensitive expressions work, and this is a picture which was elaborated by Kaplan. Now, and what will be important for this lecture is that this general rule here that we've said attaches to the word type. So for instance, for the word I, the rule, an utterance of I refers to the speaker in the context in which it's tokened. This general rule is called the role of the expression by Perry. It's also called by Kaplan the character. But throughout this lecture, I'll be talking about the role of a context-sensitive expression, and by that, and I'm using Perry's terminology. And again, for Perry, the role of a context-sensitive expression is the general rule that is associated with the word type. So now I've given you the basic kind of background way of understanding what context-sensitive expressions are, and then a distinction between types of expressions and their particular uses or tokens, and then a way of talking about the meaning, the constant meaning that a context-sensitive expression type has, and then in broad outlines, how it is that constant meaning, that role, combines with the context of a particular use to give you the context-sensitive meaning. So just to summarize this example, which I've used several times so far, the word I, its type is associated with the role. An utterance of I refers to the speaker in the context in which it's tokened. So when I say the word I in the sentence, for instance, I am hungry, in that context in which I say that, I myself am the speaker. So when I apply the role or the general rule of I to this context, that gives me myself. And so this particular token of I, which I'm uttering, has me as its meaning on this occasion. So this is the kind of general picture of how the meaning of a word type, a context-sensitive word type, combines with the context to give you the meaning of a token of that word type. Okay, Now I conclude this section with a couple just intuitive or high-level challenges, initial challenges, which context sensitivity poses for the Fregean view of meaning. These challenges in any detail, but I just want to get them on the table so that you can get a quick understanding of the kinds of issues that acknowledging context sensitivity poses for thinking about meaning, especially from a Fregean standpoint. So the first is that, as one should recall, the important contribution of Frege was to distinguish sense and reference. And one important thing about sense is that sense determines referent, or the sense of an expression determines its referent. So that means, given that different tokens of a context-sensitive expression have different reference, they also have to have different senses. So what that means is that Frege's distinction between sense and reference really sheds no light on how it is that the meaning of a word type is related to the meaning of word tokens when we're talking about context-sensitive expressions, because it has to be the particular word tokens that have both a sense and a referent when we acknowledge context sensitivity. So the challenge is that Frege's distinction between sense and reference really is not going to help us understand context sensitivity. Now the second challenge is as follows. Consider an utterance of the following sentence 2. I am here now. So there's a very interesting point to be made about this sentence, which is as follows. On the one hand, 2 seems to be merely contingent. It's totally possible that I could not be here now. So right now, I'm sitting in my house recording a lecture. But that is not a necessary truth. I could have been somewhere else right now. So there's a sense in which what I'm saying when I say 2 is something that's merely contingent. It's not a necessary truth. It's not necessary that I am here right now. I could be somewhere else. However, on the other hand, 2 seems to be deeply and universally true. Whenever anyone utters it, it's true. So whenever anyone says the sentence, I am here now, what they're saying has to be true. So the challenge is, if we allow ourselves only a single level of meaning that determines reference and plays a cognitive role, so that if there's a single thing sense that plays all the relevant roles in accounting for meaning, then how can we explain the dual nature of 2? How can we explain how on the one hand it seems to be merely contingent, and on the other it seems to be deeply and universally true? So if there's only one kind of meaning, sense, and this one thing plays a role again of determining reference and playing a cognitive role or epistemic role, then how can it explain both the contingency and the universality? Because these two intuitions seem to be in conflict. Okay, so this kind of puzzle is one thing that Kaplan tries to resolve, and I'm not going to be going into detail of it. I am now in the next video going to go into the details of Perry's argument against Frege's framework on the basis of context sensitivity.